Welcome to the Directors UK podcast. We're the professional association for UK film and TV directors. No matter the format, no matter the genre, our featured directors share their approach to the craft. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. I am, without any further ado, I'm delighted to introduce you to director Nadia Latif, who will be joined by George Amponsah, and I will be having a conversation.
Okay, hello.
Hi, thanks for coming.
Okay, to begin with, Nadia, I have to say thank you very much for asking me to come and moderate the film.
Roy.
I still don't quite know why I'm here, but I'm also a filmmaker, and I can especially appreciate how hard it is to make your debut dramatic feature. And I watched the film a couple of times. It's a stunning film. I want to prepare you because a lot of my questions this evening are going to be coming from a place of basic jealousy and envy, and so with that in mind, the first question I've got to ask you is, how on earth did you get to co-write a screenplay with the great Walter Mosley, and then following that up, the casting, William Dafoe and Corey Hawkins, a dream casting partnership, I would have thought. So,
If you want to be really sick, it's my first ever screenplay as well. I'd never written before I wrote on this film. Sorry, it's not like a humble brag. That's like everything is possible. Yeah, so I've been a theatre director for a long time. I've been a theatre director for like 15, 16 years. So it's quite a weird thing making your debut film later in life because you're suddenly like back at the beginning in some ways. But I read the book, 21 years ago when I was at university and loved it. And it always stayed with me. But I didn't really think I was going to get to make films. I knew I wanted to be a theatre director. And I thought that maybe one day I would be like really successful and like Sam Mendes or Danny Boyle, someone would let me make a film. But I needed a certain level of success first before you could kind of transition over. I was wrong, but like that's how my dumb brain in my 20s thought. And then actually, I was telling this to George outside. I knew the guy who was going to direct this before me. So it had been in development for like ever since it had been published. And I get this call, and I can tell you exactly when it was. It was Trump's first state visit in his first term.
So sorry, Nadia, can I ask you, in development since when? When was it?
Oh, so 2004, I think the book had been published. And it'd just been like through various, Charles Burnett was going to direct it at one stage. Barry Jenkins was going to direct it, and then they get down the pecking order to me. But I knew the guy who was going to direct it before me, and he called me up and he was like, "Oh, I hear you love this Walter Mosley book." I was like, "Yeah, why?" And he was like, "Oh, well, I'm directing it as a film." And I was like, "Fuck!" Like it hadn't occurred to me that, oh yeah, people make films of books that you really love and care about. So I went and had this like cup of tea with him and told him like why I love the book. And then I hadn't even made a short film at that stage. And then I was making my first short film, White Girl. And I got my first agent. And I was like, whatever happened to that Man in My Basement film? I just wanted to see it. And she was like, oh, they're actually looking for a new director. And I was like, just get me in. And she was like, this is a swing, babe. And I was like, I know it's a swing, but I am the most like passionate about this story. Just get me in. And I just turned up to this meeting with like 100-page. It wasn't really a pitch deck. It was like everything that the book had ever made me feel in images. And I was like, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to turn it into, like, I know how to do this.
And can I ask, who were you pitching to?
So at the time, the British producers were Protagonist, and the American producers really, it's just Walter Mosley's producer is a woman called Diane Houslin. And then, God bless, I didn't have a finished short film. Like, I was like, here's a rough cut of my short film.
Were you pitching to Walter Mosley? Because I noticed he's an exec producer.
So after I pitched to them and they were like, and I was like, oh, what's going to happen? They were like, we're going to fly you to LA to meet Walter. And I got flown to LA, I think like 2 weeks after that. And I went into, like, you don't understand how much I didn't know about anything. Like, I got to the CAA office and it was like the Death Star looming in front of me, and I was, terrified.
Presumably, you knew about the book. You knew about.
I knew the work, and at that time Walter was going to be writing it on his own, and I went in and I pitched the idea to Walter, and the pitch element of this is that tonally, like, the book and the film are cousins, not twins. Do you know what I mean? Like, there are quite a lot of deviations between the film and the book, so I kind of had to sell him on this idea of, like, I've got a different idea for the tone of it. And I walked out the meeting and they called me and they were like, "Will you stay? And will you work on the script with Walter?"
Okay. How was that collaboration?
I mean, it's quite weird from seeing, like, one of your literary heroes, like, on the inset of his books, to being, like, in his apartment and he's in, like, a tracksuit. But the thing is, I met Miriam Nair in 2016 and she said something to me that made me feel really better about myself as a filmmaker, where she was like, "Your advantage as a theatre director is that you've worked with more actors and writers than most film directors have had hot dinners." And that's true. I've only ever been a director of new writing as well. So I've worked with, like, 40, 50 writers in my life. Do you know what I mean? And she's like, "That's your strength, is you know how to work with writers and you know how to work with actors." And so actually, you get into it with Walter Mosley and you're like, well, we're just working on the script. Like, I'm not kind of overwhelmed by that. And then the pandemic happened, and Walter had kind of written a couple of drafts, and I'd been at the Sundance Lab with a different film, which actually I thought was going to be my first film. I very much thought Man in My Basement was going to be my second film. It's not how it worked out. But my experience at the Sundance Lab, where whether you're a director or a writer, you have to write scenes, and particularly a writer that I met there called William Wheeler, really gave me the strength to be like, I can write, I can do this. And I wrote to the producers saying, I think I need to write on this film.
So when did it go into production?
It was, how many times did we go into prep? I think we went to prep 3 times. It was awful. It was so traumatic. Partly that was to do with, we had a casting change, and then we were going to go again, and then the strikes happened, and then eventually we shot in very beginning of 2024. But originally, so from like 2022 onwards, we were like, we're going to go. It hasn't quite worked out.
Nadia, I've got to say congratulations. I mean, it's a stunning film. I think it's got a mix of sort of tension and humor and sort of psychological dread. It kind of made me think of some of David Fincher's work. I thought about Fight Club, and at a point it occurred to me that the Willem Dafoe character could be a complete figment of Corey Hawkins' character's imagination. As the film progressed, it just became more and more sort of internal in a way. Was that something that you were going for in the script, or did some of that sort of emerge?
Yeah, totally. And actually, just to answer your previous question about how do you get Willem Dafoe and Corey Hawkins, this is really, you send a script to Willem Dafoe and sometimes he say, yeah, he just said yes. Like, he just was like, yeah, no questions asked, let's do it. And I got on a Zoom and we started talking about the character, and it was cool.
Can I ask, what did Willem Dafoe say why he said yes? Why was he?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time. So Willem came on board in 2021. So I've spent like 4 years with Willem at this stage, and we've developed like a very profound working relationship. I met Corey through a slightly more conventional casting process. But I think for Willem, and I'd encountered Willem as a theatre actor before I'd actually ever encountered him as a film actor.
So you're saying he said yes because he knows you and loves you?
Yeah, no, but it was kind of like, with people at the theatre, we kind of knew each other's work. Do you know what I mean? Like, he'd sort of, he was like, oh, I know you did that thing. And I was like, yeah, you did that thing. Yeah. But also I think for Willem, he's just like looking for something that's a challenge. And the challenge in this film is to take one of the world's most famously physical actors and give him a 6x6 box and say, act now. And he loved it. Like, he was in heaven. He never left the cage. He would stay in the cage all day long. So yeah, and Corey is, I think for actors, it's always a punt on a debut director. But I think that the fact that I had so much experience in the theatre of working with actors, they were like, we know you've got that. We know that you can do that bit.
Because again, you're a debut director. You're working with an actor with the sort of legendary status, really, of William Dafoe, and even Corey Hawkins. He's hot. And what can happen is before the actors of that stature can sort of take over somewhat and start to, sort of the direction they want it to go.
No, not at all. Not at all. They were, and I'm quite strict, and I'm quite like, the text is the text, and we have to investigate the text and the images, and they just got that. Do you know what I mean? But equally, I'm like, what you need, I'll give you, but it has to be something we're trying to understand together. And I think, like, weirdly, when I was in America, when we were doing the press tour in America, Americans are obsessed with asking you how much of the script was improvised. I mean, they were asking him, how much was improvised? And he was like, none, because she would have beat me. Like,
Said that Willem Dafoe.
yeah, I was just like, absolutely none of this was improvised. Like, it was all meticulously like, none of it.
Ask a different question. To what extent did Willem Dafoe and Corey Hawkins sort of inject their ideas into it? Was it?
So I intentionally rehearsed them separately. So they meet for the first time in the first scene, and we shot all of Willem's scenes are shot in sequence. So they were going through the real experience of meeting each other, getting to know each other. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I rehearsed them entirely separately, partly so that they were going to be completely surprised by what the other person was doing, which is super great. But also, it was based in the reality of the film, which is, so we didn't have a lot of time to rehearse, and I spent all of that time rehearsing with Corey and all of the actors that make up his community, because they had to have a collective imagined history. So they needed to know things about, when did his mother die? When did his father, they all needed to build 30 years of history. Willem turns up in the first scene and nobody knows who he is. So I was like, in a way, you just replicate that through a rehearsal process of going, I don't need to know anything about you. We're just going to respond in the room. And sometimes, like, one of them would throw a turtle curveball, and you could see the other guy be like, great, this is great. This is so good.
Okay, let me try a curveball and just come with a different position. I've got to ask, what was the budget for the film? Could we say?
I think it was about £7.5 million by the end. I said this to you outside, but I was like, I was always making like a much cheaper film in my head. And we went through many versions of it, right? None of those versions involved shooting exclusively in Sag Harbor, mainly because Sag Harbor doesn't look now like it did in 1994. But we looked at Georgia, we looked at Massachusetts, we looked at South Africa, we looked at Scandinavia. Like, we were really, so I think the budget ended up sort of matching the version of the film we had to make, which involved building a house from scratch in the woods.
That was going to be my next question.
Look at your face, you're like, that house is fake. No, it's just...
Right, $7.5 million to that's a healthy budget. It's decent. So what was the lion's share of the budget? Where did that go? And it's great. It looks great. The production values are clear to see.
Yeah, I would say probably of building a house. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, and actually, it's one of those films where I was like, yeah, it's not like in one place, and then you go like, it's actually got like weirdly quite a high number of locations. There were several. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, if you build a house from scratch, you're gonna need a bigger boat of money, basically. But and it's never anybody who's made a film in the room, is it ever enough? Like, I just feel like it goes.
That is true. Yeah, that was my steep learning curve making my first short film for $2.5 million. Every day that I just kept hearing the same thing. We can't afford that.
My thing is that I never. Bloody hell! Sorry, have you all not been able to hear us all the time? But the thing that I felt was that I never wanted more stuff. I just wanted more time. Like, I never, or it's like, I'll do it with less stuff if I can have more time. And that's the thing I figured out for my next film, is that I just want time.
Time cost.
Yeah, but if it's like, do you want to do this, fancy car crash? I'm like, no, I just want more time to do stuff with that.
Okay, let's talk about, identity, authorship and industry. I've written down on this section. So as one Black British director to another, I know personally how tricky it can be navigating people's expectations of what kind of film you should make, what stories you should tell, how you should represent, what the voice should be, etc., etc. How do you, as a director, protect your own sort of creative space and desires with it?
I think partly, It's funny you call me Black British because actually I'm from Sudan and I moved to this country later in life. I moved to this country for university, and my mother is part English, but and so I think I've experienced many different values of blackness. Like I grew up back in a black country, and I moved here, and I was just like, "Whoa, minority blackness! This sucks. This is fucking awful." Um, and and I've sort of worked in many countries and many languages as and so I feel like where I don't see my identity as being a fixed point anyway, and it never has been, uh, and it's true for everyone. But and so I sort of feel, I think the thing that I have always avoided is making work that is clearly uh, biographical. I don't like. I think work has to be personal. This film is deeply personal. It's full of my anxiety about my parents dying. It's full of my anxieties about my responsibility to my culture. But it's not biographical, and that's where I think I feel most comfortable of going. I'm in there. You don't know where I am, but I'm in every atom of it. I'm sort of less inclined to like. I desperately want to make a film set in my home country, and that's the hardest thing for me to figure out.
It's funny you should say that because, the film's obviously, and the book is obviously about race, and the last image, we'll get to that, the last shot of the film, and, Corey Hawkins looks into the lens, he's reading Franz Fanon book, Richard of the Earth. But funnily enough, if I'm personally speaking, the bit that really got to me and touched me emotionally was the stuff about his parents, his father's dying. And yeah, but absolutely. So my mum's in her late 80s, and that it just seemed less in a way about it. Just seemed that it wasn't about something universal about the film. And is that something we were going for?
100%. Oh my God, I could kiss you. It's yeah, because I just was like, my parents are 11 well, and I'm the eldest of 6 children. And so I have this very big family. So in a way, it was about the idea of being the last of your family and having nobody else in the world who would like take care of you when you're old or whatever was so scary to me. That's really kind of where the, I guess, like horror elements of the film come from. Was just like the pervasive fear of being alone, and they're two orphans, right? Like, although William does reveal at the very end that he's like, "Oh, I've got these 2 wives. Please send them letters," and we're like, "Let's not talk about that. Not a problem." Yeah, and I sort of, that's sort of an invention. It's not really in the novel, but I wanted to, I guess, anchor Corey's character more in the sadness of losing his parents, which is this thing that's going to happen to all of us. And I simply wanted to ask the question, if, these things that happen to all of us, what if you didn't get up from it? Like, what if you're like, I didn't bounce back from my parents dying? Like, it actually is the defining event of my life.
Like with this character in this novel and also in the film, it appears that he's somewhat complicit in the death of his father.
Hey, that's his uncle. I was in the pandemic when I was writing this. I was living with my then boyfriend, now husband, and my grandmother, and taking care of her through surgery. It's so awful to be in that proximity to somebody's suffering. But that's where that whole image of him, and he's in the bed and he says, I just ignored him when he started screaming. But again, I was like, it is that thing where, I would wake up and hear my grandmother crying out because she'd, something was causing her pain or something, and just being like, I love you more than I've ever loved anyone, but I also like hate you right now, and I'm suffering, and that was, just I mean about things being like personal but not.
Absolutely. Okay, the final shot of the film, uh, Corey Hawkins' character is now in the cage. The cage is open. I noticed the cage door's open. He's reading the Franz Fanon book, The Wretched of the Earth, and then he looks up to camera, which we call breaking the fourth wall. What was that shot about? What was your thinking behind that?
I always knew that I wanted him to be in the cage at the end of the film, which again is not from the book. It's just how I wanted to end it, because I wanted everything that had happened to him to have meaning, and this idea that, when Aniston first says to him, men have always taken themselves to mountaintops to he actually really took that to heart, and he was like, it is important to have this moment of reflection in your life about who you want to be. So I knew I wanted to be in there. I didn't want it to be a sign of kind of, him giving up. It's like a hopeful image. So he's obviously changed all of the furniture to be his family furniture and his mother's paintings. But the thing we argued about the most was what book he was going to read. Like right up until shooting, we were like, "Well, we should shoot different versions," because
So whom rule?
me and Corey were just going like, "What does it mean? What does it mean?"
Did he have another book in mind?
But it was always between. It was about how sentimental the ending wanted to be, because I was like, there's a version where he's reading Narcissus, Anna Diop's character references his aunt's diaries, and we were like, is there a version where he's reading his kind of family history? Is there a version where he's reading one of Aniston's books? Like, that's the kind of stain of Aniston on his soul. And then I had the idea of the Franz Fanon. We were reading Black Skin, White Masks a lot when we were prepping the film, but that felt a bit on the nose. And I was like, I want to feel like there's this kind of like radical potential for his character in the future. He's got a new do, he's got a new look, and really what it was about this idea that a Batman must determine himself. Do you know what I mean? Like he can't just follow somebody else's path. It's like I need to think about a new, possibly radical form of myself.
And why does he look into camera and therefore look out to the audience?
Because I think there's something about how he has been considered. Like Aniston's been looking at him and he's been looking at them, and they've been considering what each other means. And in a way, I wanted to have a moment of him confronting the audience and being like, what do you think of me? And weirdly, Corey hated shooting that. He was like, oh, I feel really exposed. And I was like, great, that's really good, because it means that there's something in that. And I think it's really thing they were editing that he was looking at the camera for like 5 minutes. Don't you know what I mean? I was like, how far can we go? And that felt good.
So, look, I mean, you worked across theatre, television,
I have written television.
you've written television, you've made your first feature film. So what's feeding you creatively now? What do you think, what would you like to do next?
I'm doing a play next. I'm doing a play, a sort of play I've never done before. I'm actually doing a stage adaptation of a film. So I'm doing a stage adaptation of Babak Ambari's film Under the Shadow in the spring, which is fun because the fun stuff about horror on screen is the kind of the magic. But in theatre, all of that magic has to become practical. And it's quite like Victorian. It's all like trapdoors and smoke and mirror. I haven't got a nice time. But to be honest, I was saying this to you outside, but things that I like about films are spending time with people who are not like me. And so I feel like I do have a British film that I'm working on, but like I've just started writing a film in Arabic that's set in Saudi Arabia in the 1970s. I'm writing a film in French after that. Like I feel like I want to spend some time like going back out into the world, and that's partly also about trying to meet different film values. Do you know what I mean? Like I was just on a jury at LFF for the first feature, and like man, it's just like Cambodian films and Thai films and Mongol, and it's just like such different values of cinema, and I just don't know if I'm even like how to go and like play in those sandpits. I think the thing that I was adapting in my heart, I don't mean this literally, I'm not trying to make an adaptation of it, is Heart of Darkness. But the idea that in going to a place, you change it and it changes you. And I'm sort of quite interested in those stories about people journeying through places and how it changes them. And there's so many films, like there's loads of films where that's the narrative. But I think, yeah, I want to do.
I mean, you took root in Heart of Darkness. Obviously, James Conrad, famously, Apocalypse Now was made somewhat based on that novel. Is that, I mean, this film comes from a literary source. Is that something that you're quite inspired by, works of maybe adapting into?
If you asked me 5 years ago, I would have told you I would never adapt a book. Or I would just nah, it's lame. But actually, I think it's about finding. I think if you can find a genuinely cinematic language for it, then you should do it. But I feel like, and I love books. I mean, like I'm an avid reader, and sometimes I'm like, nothing is as good as a novel. So why would you try? Like, no film can be as good as like a truly great Marvel. It can be a great film, but like, somebody once asked me, it's like about what art forms do you, if you had to rank them, or what's closest to godliness? And I'm like, I think I'm somewhere between like a novel and the ability to write really great music. Do you know what I mean? So I sort of feel like if a film is going to attempt to do what a novel does, it's got to have a really good reason. So but really at the moment, like I really want to do like a reimagining of this. Does anybody know the film Le Grand Bouffe? Yeah. So I really want to remake Le Grand Bouffe, but I want to do it from the perspective of the woman. There's one woman in it who turns up, and I wanted to retell the whole story from a different perspective and make her French Algerian servant. More on that later. But do you know what I mean? Like I'm sort of quite interested in like reconsidering things, totally changing the kind of form of it, rather than just like straight it out this way.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't know how much more time we've got, but I've got to say congratulations on this film. It's an amazing first feature. Um, okay, so what did the actors think about it? What did Willem Dafoe and Corey Hawkins think about this film?
We spent a really long time together. Willem came on board to this project in 2021, so we were working on it for 3 years before we shot it, and Corey probably for like a year. And we worked a lot from stimuli. So there was like a list of like 30 films that would not really, if I were to list them for you, you'd be like, what the fuck have these got to do with your film? And I'm like, they're more about understanding my perspective, a kind of anti-colonial perspective as well. Like it was more about like getting in the headspace.
So what films?
I mean, there was lots of films where like Usman Samben and Med Hondo, but also like Harry He's Here to Help and Oni Baba. Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of it was just like getting into a kind of headspace where the images in the film would begin to kind of pop out at you. Separately, me and Willem were watching documentaries. A big one for us was The Laughing Man, which is I can't remember what year it's from. It's just like a black and white hour-long documentary. It's an ex-Nazi who interviewed who wants to become a mercenary in West Africa.
Why, when you watch that, presumably willing to get into his character?
Yeah, I think Willem can lead the acting. Corey can also do the acting. The headspace for Charles, for Corey, was more about understanding his emotional headspace. For Willem, it was about understanding a worldview of people in extreme political situations and instances of extreme cruelty. So that the act of killing was quite a good film for us. Do you know what I mean? To be like, how do you become a person who is that casual about violence? So, and for him, look, he's Willem Dafoe, but he's also just like a white guy from Wisconsin. He's like, I don't have any experience of this worldliness. So he had to really go, what is the world that Aniston operates in?
And I say that, but on screen, he's Willem Dafoe. And as you know, as a director, you're watching him on screen, but you're also seeing other roles he's been in. He played Jesus Christ, Last Temptation of Christ. And so therefore, his back catalogue, shows it's someone who has had a relationship with the notion of extreme good and extreme evil.
Yeah, but I think it's like in order to, the thing about his character, I think, is that he doesn't believe that he is necessarily evil. He was like, maybe I'm just the middleman. Do you know what I mean? And so it was more about understanding how he could believe that. So he's like, and so we had to kind of understand the entire underworld of political fixes. And I'd spent a lot of time in the Congo a few years ago working on a different project. And I'd met so many of these people where you're like, why are you here? What are you up to? Are you a gun runner? Do you know what I mean? And so it's sort of introducing him to that.
For me, the first, I think, the first time you see him on screen, he knocks on the door and Corey Hawkins' character opens the door. And, he says, have you got a basement? And he said, well, yeah, I do. He says, I want somewhere where I can stand tall and erect. And I'm thinking, if that was me and this guy, William, he wants somewhere he can stand tall and erect, I would just slam the door and then lock it. Yeah, but my point is, his performance in the film, he just, he says things, and everything he says kind of has a hint of menace, I think, to it. I think it's a great performance.
Yeah, I think it's I really like the. I mean, it's so gross to say. Like, I really like the scene I wrote, but I really like the scene where he he says to him, people die every day. It's just like sometimes, people, and sometimes people love their loved ones so much they die without them, but most people don't. And I actually think it's his best thing in the film because he's just so like relaxed about it. He's just like, but that was the thing that he had to wrap his head around, was just like playing a character who'd seen everything. He's like, I've seen every extent of cruelty in the world. So when he gets that bit where he's like, I sold a baby to a guy to feed to his dog, then that had to feel real. He was like, I have to believe that there are people in the world who would do these things.
Again, of course, these things are always subjective, and that's the beauty of film and art. It's what it means to each individual. And for me, Willem Dafoe's character in the film, he doesn't. To me, there's something about which he kind of reminds me of those sort of Dr. Faustus, those sort of plays where he could actually be the devil, or the other side of what God. So he's not. What I'm saying, he doesn't necessarily come across as a literal human.
But I think something that I've discovered across many projects is that actors can't play ideas; they have to play people. And so although you're like, have to give him a reality, and Willem is very fixated on like props and very like so for example like the letters that Corey burns at the end, Willem sat and wrote them all, wrote 10 copies of each or whatever, so that because he was like, I know, and he wanted to pick the pen, he wanted to pick the chair, he wanted to pick the lamp. Corey is not that guy. Corey's like, I want to enter the world that you've designed for me and I'll figure it out. You know what I mean? So you'd be like there, like looking under the bed, going,
what did they get on, working together, Corey and Willem?
They got on really well because Corey's not just number one on the call sheet, he's in every scene in the film. And it's like, he's running a marathon and Willem's just popping in for 2.5 weeks, but 3 weeks. But what was great about it is that they each had separate challenges. They weren't doing the same difficult things. Because I think then you get into a bit of friction sometimes, but it was like, they were just playing two totally different sports next to each other. And like, and Willem found certain things in the film incredibly difficult. They're probably not the obvious things. Like, there's that bit where he's acting straight down the barrel, telling Corey about himself. And he just found it really difficult. Like, he's just like, I don't know why, but this is really hard. And Corey's like, well, I had to go swimming in the sea at 4 a.m. and it was like minus 20 degrees. So we've had a shit day. That was what was, they could kind of share in problems.
Simpatico.
Well, exactly. And it'd be like, oh, I can support you. What can I do to help you in this thing that we're doing to make it a little bit easier? But yeah, I mean, I think William, the whole thing about how limited that space is and how you can still keep the imagination flowering, that was always the biggest. Because they had, and also the way that we shot it, they were so close to each other for loads of it. I mean, Ula Pontico, so brilliant DP, sometimes like the camera would literally be here and they're like, I've got nowhere to go. Like, I've got like an inch to play with. So it was quite a difficult time.
Given that, the one of the key themes in the film was about race, and the N word is used by both characters, and I couldn't help thinking about the political situation, the climate in America at the time. Was that ever really discussion?
No, it's funny. I did a play called Fairview a few years ago, which was about black people being observed by white people, but it was a very kind of racially fraught piece. And somebody else, they're like, do you just talk about it? We're like, no, because actually in that moment, it's a bit like the thing that just can't play ideas. It's like you just have to worry about the practical things in front of you. And actually, like, I really love that scene where Willem, says to him, it's about, this is what we call you, like, behind your back. Because in a way, it sums up any point in American history. It feels relevant now.
Tom has his way that it won't have to be behind your back in.
Well, that's where I wanted to. So the novel is set in 2004, and I set the film in 1994 because I really wanted to contrast. I guess, like, to me as an African, I felt like living in Africa in the 1990s, I was being fed a lot of African American culture, but it didn't feel like African Americans had the concern for the African geopolitical situation. So I wanted to contrast, and what I remember watching every day was watching the O.J. Simpson trial. it was like beamed on CNN or something. Do you know what I mean? Like you could watch a kind of summary of it every day, and you would watch that, and then there would be footage of the Rwandan genocide in like the next news article. And so I wanted to recreate that in the film, which is why he's always, the news from Rwanda keeps. And if you listen carefully, at one point, an update from the O.J. Simpson trial is playing one scene. So I sort of feel like that was such a moment for me of like, what is being black in this moment in 1994? Do you know what I mean? Like how different those two things are.
No, that's true. But obviously, we're watching the film in 2025,
That's what I mean. So it's like,
being asked
how do you?
in 2025.
But I sort of think but that's the point of like how horrible it is. Somebody asked me, it's like, could you set the fan today? And I was like, yeah. And he'd be watching the news about the conflict in Sudan or the Congo. Do you know what I mean? It would still be about the same thing, and we would be having news of, whatever court case. It doesn't really matter.
Okay, let me ask the question in a different way, coming from a different angle. Given the themes of the film, how pertinent do you think this film is now, today, in terms of what the political climate in America and somewhat in this country?
Do you know what? I think I was less thinking about that. I was so incredibly moved by Matty Diop's film The Homie about the restitution of Bonzes back to Senegal. That's why I was thinking about that more than anything else. Like I was thinking about the entire debate around whether we should give artifacts back to the nations that they come from, which of course we should. And that was the thing that I was like, this is the most relevant thing. And even not about the whole film, but I was like, this is the thing that feels like this conversation is so alive and in such a genuine and exciting way at the moment. So that's when I was like, oh, everything else is also true, but I suddenly felt like, oh, this is the only conversation that's really different at the moment. Like we are seriously talking about give it back, give it all back, give every piece of it back. If you haven't seen that film, please watch it.
Any questions?
Hello. Thank you so much for the film. I love it. And I love especially this unfolding of sort of the racial and ancestral trauma. And in a weird way, even the horror aspects of it felt to me like a part of a healing process. So they didn't actually feel terrible to me as much as I knew the deeper would sink, the higher would go up. My question is actually about the sound and the music.
I would love to talk about some of the music because Robert Aiki and Kadaro are two amazing sound artists.
It sounds so well married together that I thought it's gonna be the same person who's done both actually. And I'm just wondering about your dialogue with them. I'm a composer myself. So.
Yeah, so Robert Aiki is a composer and Chad Ororo was the sound designer. And I'd worked with Chad on a short sci-fi film that I'd made a couple of years ago. And he was like the first, I was like, we're getting the band back together. And Robert was somebody who I had just admired as a musician for years and had seen him perform live. He's a modular synth gob. Kind of, I've seen people come up to him in the street and been like, are you Robert O? And I'm just like, wow, you are like niche famous in a way that I love. And he actually reached out to me. He was like, oh, I hear you're doing this, Walter Mosley. Let's talk. And I was in New York and we'd met and drank 5 coffees and we smoked a pack of the cigarettes and the rest, as I say, was history. But Robert works in a very unorthodox way, which is, so all the music in the film is composed using the remodulated recordings of the actors and the locations. So in any scene, he will turn up and he'll put contact mics on the actors' throats, on their hands and their feet, and have them maybe replay the scene or be like, get in and out of bed, hit the bars. Or went to Sag Harbor, he would take vibrational recordings of the beach and the road and the trees. And he then modulates that into the score. So, if he was here, he'd be like, oh, you think it's strings and that bit, but actually that's Corey brushing his hair, which I turned into. But that obviously creates quite a weird whose job is it anyway when it comes to sound design. And so when we got into it, and me and Chad were working for a very long time, and we just had to bring Robert into that process. There wasn't a distinction between sound design and composition. That made the final mix quite complicated. So they thought the final mix was going to take 2 weeks. It took 9 weeks. Because I was very interested in unreal sound. Like I was like, I think this is not to neg any town people, but there can be quite a lot of literalism. And, it's all about like, oh, we have to cover everything. I'm like, okay, cool, yeah, like doors closing, yeah, that's useful. But now, what are we saying? Like, and weirdly, there's like a really early shot in the film where he goes to close the window upstairs, and I was like, oh, but I don't want, I know we're outside, but I want us to we want to cut to his sound. Yeah, so, and they were like, no, that's not the logic of it. And I was like, I know, like in his experience. So I feel like we got there in the end, but it was a really complicated bit of the film.
But would you say that the power of doing, sound design in that way is when it's something that you experience subconsciously as an audience, where it's not really obvious that, because then it turns into, it's kind of.
I think it's part of the interiority of the film. There's that understanding that you're in Charles's experience of it, and particularly as the house changes. That we spent so long designing how the atmosphere of the house would change as it became a more psychological space. But that was also part of the design. It was part of the lighting. Like it was something we'd thought of from the beginning of prep. So then when you get into the sound design at the end, it was like, okay, so we've established the boiler does this in scene 1. How much can we musicalize that? Or how much can, we turn it into something that's doing the subconscious lifting? You know what I mean? So I just wanted us to be in a world where I was like, I just don't want it to feel bogged down in literalism. It can be real, but it doesn't have to be literal. And we can choose the reality that we're, if I want the sound to be inside, it can just be inside. But yeah, Robert is amazing. Robert is like, but also like how many times, I mean, also because I'd never made a film before, I was like, the composer's going to be here for the whole shoot. And the producers are a bit like, what? And I was like, yeah, he's going to live in my spare room. And he did. Do you know what I mean? And it was like, that's just, like, how many films you ever worked on when the composer is there every day, just being like, hi, it's me. But also you'll have seen from the credits, it's like he's a one-person team. He plays the whole score. So he needed to be that embedded to really understand the scenes and to understand how it was being shot, why it's being shot that way. So the whole way through the edit, he was just composing and recomposing and recomposing. But also I went into the shoot, listened to the music that he'd already composed. So it was like shooting scenes and going, maybe. So yeah, that's how that happened.
Any other questions?
Let's see. You shot partly in Wales as well. Did you
Shot mainly in Wales. So
was that the house in Wales, or did you?
yeah, no. So we shot everything's all the interiors. So the house, we built the house. The house is just like the facade of a house in a wood near Bridgend. And that was actually because we needed his house to face his neighbour's house. We needed a road. And so we found the neighbour's house, which was just like the back of a stoat shed. And we were like, yeah, we'll paint it and make it look like a house. And then we literally turned around 180 degrees and went, all right, we've got to build his house over there, which was, it was basically a swamp as well. So we had to sort of like sink these foundations into it. But yeah, I mean, we didn't pick Wales. It was more like we were going around the world going, where can we get that gives us everything that we need? And it just so happened that Wales gave us everything that we needed.
You didn't travel around the world to find the location?
And yeah, as in I went to Georgia, I went to Massachusetts, I went to South Africa, I went to Sweden. Yeah. Like I was like, let's do it. Let's so Joey, like I was like, because I sort of needed to, you get into boring things about like, do the trees match? And we never had a problem of trying to match this country for America as roads. But actually we had quite a lot of luck with private roads and was, and you would go in and put in the lines ourselves. But and then we went and we shot a week in Sag Harbor. But the problem is that Sag Harbor doesn't look like it did 30 years ago. So in a way you were like more limited shooting there actually. But it felt more frustrating to be like, oh man, I just wish that gentrification hadn't happened.
I don't think it's important for the film to be recognizably a specific place.
Yeah, we worked a lot with people from, so we had somebody on the crew who was from Sag Harbor, African American, 8th generation herself, and she came and worked on the film to kind of be a kind of just a cultural consultant. But like loads of the stuff that's in the house was stuff that people from Sag Harbor sent us to put in the film. You know, like family photos and bits of all of the quotes were donated by them. They really cared. We went into the screening of it in the Sag Harbor, and I was just sat there sweating. You know, but there were enough shots of the actual Sag Harbor for them to be like, "It's cool, thanks."
You know, it didn't matter to me.
Yes, Sag Harbor. But if somebody made a film about where you were from, and they were like, "Oh, we're going to pretend that Charing Cross is next to that Camden," you'd be like, "How dare you?" That is one thing that truly annoys me. Pretending that two chief sorts are next to each other.
There's a credit over here.
Cheers. I just wondered if you could talk a bit about the schedule. And I saw that you had a B cam, so I was wondering if it was 2 cameras all the way through, or just at certain points, or
Yeah, the schedule. I could speak for those about schedule, but the schedule made the most sense that it could, and then it made no sense whatsoever. But that was, you know, it's sort of like nobody's fault, and so you're just like, well, we're just suffering here under this schedule that's the best version of terrible. We did have a B camera. To be honest, I feel like you asked me what one of my biggest lessons was from this film. Is that I don't know if I would have a second unit again, because I think I just felt so kind of anxious all the time about whether this footage was going to be, and it was pretty small stuff that it would do. Do you know what I mean? It's like, crap, I forgot to get a close up of the hands during the changing the lights on the, you know, whatever. But I still would like be in a cold sweat waiting for the rushes to come back, being like, wasn't it like bits. And we also, I think there were 2 scenes that we shot with 2 cameras, and they were both location scenes because it was just like we had like an hour, and it would only have worked if we shot with 2 cameras. The rest of the film we all shot with just us. There was one thing that we had to do with the second unit, and I was actually deeply appreciative of it. And there was one day where the scene where he goes and he sees a giant man in the cage. That was shot, but that was like the VFX unit kind of took over and shot that. And we kind of set it up in less than 2 because it took so long. It took 7 hours. Basically, having to squish this. We used the Jaws trick. So everyone knows about Jaws. It's like, you know, how do you make a smaller cage and a smaller shark? So I was like, we're gonna need a smaller cage and a smaller dude. So we got a scale down. I think it was 1/5 scale, and they're a very small gentleman, and we stuffed him in the cage. But because he could only do it in very small stints, it ended up some hours.
Did you shoot that, or was it?
So I came in and would like shoot it every split. I'd come in and kind of check in on it and do another kind of setup and then leave them, because he could only do kind of one take, and then he'd need to take a break from being stuffed naked into a cage. But so yeah, I think it was more I didn't figure out my relationship with the second unit. Like and it was sort of just I was like, yeah, second unit, and I was like, I don't actually know what that is, what the best relationship is. Like, you may see things that you don't learn until you do it. And like, God bless them all, they were all very nice men. But I think I was like, I think I would have set up the relationship differently. Actually, we think they maybe weren't as they hadn't been part of the process in the same way as well. But so probably. No, it was just sort of practical. Like, you don't have enough time because there's terrible shows.
I mean, it's still a money-saving exercise, right? From the point of view of the producer.
Yeah, so I think it probably on this show it didn't end up being enough of a money-saving. So we also had the realities of we lost Corey, as in like we could only have so many shooting days because he had to go and do another job. So it's not like I go like, well, let's just stick another shooting day on. It was like there's a hard out here. But yeah, I think it was 30 Princeville and then another sort of 2.5 days in Sag Harbor spread over 5 days, which was just to do with the times of day that we could shoot. But so yeah, sort of 32-ish days in total. The budget or aims of before kind of just made sense. Do you know what I mean? It sort of just met in the middle. And then also Runnels availability. We always knew we were going to shoot the basement in sequence, and we were going to do that as its own thing. So that's just sort of how it ironed out, really. And then the other thing is because the Sag Harbor shoot had to cross both winter and summer, we finished the photography in Wales. I went into the edit for a month, and then we went and shot Sag Harbor, which was incredibly useful because we could be like, let's go pick up a little thing of this and a little thing of that. Do you begin to understand the rhythm of the film? And there was so much, I guess we would grill it B-roll. Do you know what I mean? Just like stuff. But I was like, and it's the stuff that we would have had time to do it in the main shoots. But suddenly,
You might not have known that you needed to do it.
oh yeah, and it was
You'd had some.
and it was just me and I mean anyone who's encountered the American but so which was tough. That was a really big learning curve for me. Was like moving to the American system and being like, this is really intense. But so me and Ula would just like be like, leave the camera in the car. I would just go out at night and I'd be the camera assistant, being like, think this is the right lens? No, it's the wrong lens. So most of that kind of night footage was just me and Ula going out in the car that I was driving and just shooting whatever we could shoot.
You've been paid to do that. Anyways, another question.
Did you, first of all, well done.
Thank you.
Did you bring Udo on? Or haven't you?
Yeah. I just naturally had seen like all the films that she'd made. I mean, like it's Sam Cameroni's amazing Recams, I think Incredible film, and so on. They were like, and nobody mince Brat Peeper look as beautiful as Udo Ponticos. Like she was so gifted, understanding different skin tones, and there were so many different skin tones in this film. But also, I'm talking really quick, so this thing, but I was really interested. The majority of my HODs are women or people of color. And I was very interested in having people who had different experiences of the questions in the film. So actually, like our production designer is Austrian, Ula is Polish, our first AD was Belgian. Like even having a kind of more broad European perspective on questions of colonialism were incredibly useful. And then African American people and Black African people, Cameroonian people, but it felt like Ula was somebody who was thinking about the questions of the film in a very interesting way, and we had a great old time. And after Simone Garsola as well, great people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nadia, and thank you, George, as well, for wonderful hosting.
This podcast was recorded at a Directors UK member event. You can hear plenty more directors in conversation by subscribing on the usual streaming platforms. Follow us on social media and find out more about us at directors.uk.com.